Yes. Okay. So, hello, October. I think it's the most beautiful, one of the most beautiful months because of the colors everywhere, basically, unless you live in Hawaii or somewhere where it's always spring. But living in Minnesota actually gave me the benefit of living up north and experiencing just gorgeous colors. So this reminded me of the time spent, the lifetime spent in the United States, and also reminds me a lot that the bench in the middle of our beautiful parks in Skopje, where basically everything is golden right now. And I wanted to say a big hello to Chicago, to Sarah, to this wonderful person and a colleague of mine who comes from Chicago. Chicago is very close to my heart. And I mentioned to find this picture of Chicago. I'm sure there are better ones, but this is such an amazing and beautiful city. And it's just the skyline of Chicago in October. So hello, Chicago. Hello, Sarah. Hello, everybody. To everyone from Chicago that will be watching us on our YouTube channel. Hello, Minneapolis. Minneapolis is my first, my second, my equal love, I would say. It's somewhere where I spent almost 18 years of my life and where I got to learn what I know today. So I'm really honored and happy that Minneapolis has been part of my life, and the University of Minnesota at Minneapolis, as Minneapolis part of my family. And of course, hello. Oh, okay, we're admitting more people as we go. Hello, Skopje. Beautiful Skopje, ancient Skopje, Skopje of my heart. To the ones who have visited, and Sarah, Karen, Sharon, you have visited Skopje, and you have a kind spot for Skopje in your hearts. You've been here more than once. So this is a picture of the Skopje skyline. Basically, you recognize the downtown, the bridge that connects one part of Skopje to the other, different in many ways. See the fortress in the background and part of the old bazaar. So I also wanted to say hello to fall. This is a sky view of the old Turkish bazaar, which is one of the biggest ones outside of Turkey, I would say, and in former Yugoslavia. It's quite an authentic place to be, and this is the season where basically we have started to roast chestnuts, and they are in the season and they are the best. And when you just have them warm and that smell in your hands, it's just such a delight to have. So I hope that next time when you will be here, it might be in October, September, whenever you can come, and you're more than welcome to be with us, and we're good hosts. So what I will be talking about today, oops, I apologize about that. I need to go back. I'm sorry. I don't know, it doesn't want to go back, but I will talk about strategies, classroom strategies, about working with children with autism who are also hard of hearing or deaf, and my experience. So a video that I wanted to share with you is the first. I would like to begin with basically answering the question, do more hearing children have autism than deaf children? And this came out right from actually a study that is currently still going on with University of Boston, or Boston University. And it's very interesting because they're really working on this and trying to support do research for children that have autism, but also are deaf or hard of hearing. So, Sarah, okay, I will click on this but are we able to play it? It doesn't want to play. So I may go back to it with the link. It should, somehow it doesn't. Okay. Anyways, we will try this later. I thought it would be a success, but it didn't work out this time. What this researcher, she is a doctoral student with Boston University. And what she is talking about here in this video, she's using sign language, is that she's describing the research project and answering the question that actually this question has been under research, but from the current research that they're doing, they're finding out that, yes, there is quite a bit of an incidence of, and I should say prevalence, but the number of deaf children that have autism is not insignificant. So there is, this is just a statement from their, basically a paragraph from their site, from the Center for Autism Research Excellence Care, and it's called the Deaf Autism Project. It talks about the fact that more and more deaf children are being diagnosed with autism or autistic spectrum disorder. And even though yet there's still no instruments designed to assess and screen for autism in deaf children, or specific intervention. The research is pointing out that they're doing so far that they are quite a few children who are deaf and autistic, and their focus is on designing and implementing screening tools and assessments to diagnose children very early, because the earlier they're diagnosed and identified, then the lesser the language and cognitive developmental delays will have impact on the children and their lives. So also as they go along, then more and more interventions will be built upon what we already know. And primary investigator in this research is Aaron Shield, who I believe is a psychologist. And this is very exciting work because this is one of the world's first and largest studies on autism and deaf children learning sign language up to date. So what is the impact of hearing loss? Students who were born deaf and who have lost their hearing in childhood are very different from students who have lost hearing later in life in terms of educational disadvantage. So we know that the language abilities are often affected by hearing loss depending on the age of onset. And therefore, in the United States, and Sarah, please correct me about the dating of this, but we have it in North Macedonia as well, but the screening, the infant screening right after they're born, the hearing is being checked, right? So how long has this been in practice, Sarah?
Gosh, that's a great question. I'll look it up while you're talking, but I think it's actually one of the public health initiatives within the United States and pediatrics that has been effective. Yes. So I think it's a game changer. And I think the piece that, and I think you'll probably get to this, is that newborn screen matters, but then subsequent hearing screens, whenever they're coming to see educators, therapists, pediatricians, we need to look for acquired hearing loss after that time. So a newborn screen is a pass for that time, but not forever. So
exactly. So
yeah.
something that
I'll look that up though.
Great, wonderful, thank you. So something that we need to be mindful of, especially mindful of and careful, is the early years of the child development. So 0 to 3, the early intervention years, if we talk from a therapeutic perspective and clinical perspective, but also even as parents, educators, people who are in touch with children all the time, that we have to be aware and on the lookout for signs or symptoms that something may not be quite right with our children's hearing. So children very often suffer from middle ear infections, and this affects the hearing tremendously. Both I have been, and Elena, we have been witnesses in our clinical practice of having children who have been misdiagnosed and who have had recurrent ear infections without significant symptoms, have been taken to many different ENT local physicians, and somehow, for some reason, the placement of pressure equalizing tubes. So just for the audience who is not familiar with this, just raise your hand so we can tell you what that means. So those tubes are inserted so that the children who are suffering ear infections, those ear infections are prevented and they do not recur, so that illnesses are not caused, most important of all, but then as important as that, their hearing as well, because what they learn in the first couple of years of their lives in terms of speech and language production is invaluable. So we have to just be constantly on the lookout. So the universal newborn hearing screening started in the US in 1999. So this is what just, Sarah updated me on. It's relatively new, but it's very important development. So deaf and hard of hearing students, no wonder, right? You would usually prefer visual learning strategies. So if we talk about the classrooms are the environment where the instruction and the communication is in oral format. And this is a huge challenge for these students. So not only for the students who are deaf or hard of hearing, but also for students with ADHD, ADD, autism spectrum disorder. And imagine someone who has autism and has hearing difficulties and issues on top of that. So this is the reason why students with hearing loss need the use of assistive technology to participate in class. A lot of the time, this is a laptop, a software, which is used to deliver sign language interpreters or captioning. There could be listening devices or technology that uses listening devices and computer-based software. So what is the feeling like for a student who is hard of hearing or deaf in the classroom? It's a pretty isolating experience. And when the children are younger, they're not able to express it more, maybe just with words to tell you what's wrong, but you can just tell by their behavior that, that loneliness and sort of like maybe rejection is omnipresent, because first of all, it's a mainstream classroom, and if they do not have developed language and speech skills that are equal to their peers in the class, if they're mainstream, then if it's an inclusive classroom, like it is the case now in Macedonia, these students are mostly left, with their teachers, spending time with their teachers, not that they're left alone. Kids will play with them and they do want to interact, but sometimes the noise is too much and it's overwhelming too, right? Everything coming out at them all at once. So this really impacts their social communication. And then even more important than that, we come to the emotional and mental well-being of the student and their capacity for learning. So not only the learning is difficult, hearing is difficult, that language development is difficult, social communication within the classroom is difficult, and our children spend the whole day in the classroom, right? Most of the day, just like we do at work. And then that boils down to, okay, how does this affect them emotionally? So this is why we cannot understate the importance and the continuity of really being on top of the children's hearing and just being on the watch out and the lookout. Because also the impact of hearing loss causes delays in the way we learn material. So this is the case even as they grow. It takes them much more time to transcribe what is being taught in the class. So this is why adaptations in the classroom are so important. Okay, so what can evidence-based practice do? So practice that is based on intervention that are based on research, proven research that something works. And you can see the citation below. This is just a great article from Audiology Online, and it was written actually in the format of an interview an audiologist was interviewed, and somebody who spends significant time with the children in the classroom. And basically, it was just, I learned so much from doing this presentation. I was just so excited, thinking like, wow, I get to share this with all of you today. I learned many, like old things, but new things as well. So what do we want to see, especially with children with autism who have hearing difficulties, is that we want to increase positive impact and positive behaviors. So in academic tasks, in their communication skills, we want them to develop higher cognitive skills, right? Learning, readiness, motor skills will come with that, fine motor, right? Also, building a sense of responsibility, right? Their personal accountability and responsibility for their academic progress in the classroom, the way how they play and interact with the other children, their self-regulation. So how do they regulate their emotions when they get upset or when they get overwhelmed? And also, with all of this, as we're increasing with the interventions, the positive behaviors, we are decreasing the behaviors that are problematic. And those are the behaviors that restrict learning. And those are the ones that are restricted, repetitive. They're not functional because they do not serve any purpose, right? They do not have communicative purpose. They do not sometimes even have purpose of pleasure, right? So most of the time with autism, it's because of sensory emotional regulation. So this is, I think we have to focus more, always try to really implement these to increase the positive behavior so we can have decrease of negative behaviors in order for learning to occur. So in the education of autistic students with deafness, we can say that there's really not enough data or research done on this. And this article was published in 2015, so this was 77 years ago. And at the time of the interview, the author when she was interviewed, she said, yes, we have about 50 years of research that has been established in evidence-based practices. So therapies that are proven, backed by research that they do work for children with autism. And this is not insignificant. But in deaf education, the pedagogy and the approach to learning has been around for a long time, but not really applied to students with autism. Why? Because they have been, they have started to become identified more and more lately, right? So I think that there is a body of research that is being conducted, but is yet to be published on evidence-based practices, which is the best way to go in the fields of audiology and speech and language pathology. So what we want to do here and describe is that in the teaching of the deaf students in the classroom, all unified educators, therapists or clinicians, physicians, parents, paraprofessionals, we have to do a lot of modeling, giving models, prompting, meaning that we have to really get to our students or our children to shape what they communicate. And this is really sort of a like bilingual or bicultural strategy, meaning that is bilingual because they're taught how to use sign language. You have to rely on sign language as well if they're nonverbal, and also auditory and oral strategies that are used. So it's really a multi-sensory approach and a multidisciplinary approach. So this is how basically, and this is why the focus would be on using specific strategies to increase literacy skills, language skills, speech, listening, and reading. And I think that actually my presentation is a little bit longer, but I'll have to speed up in the interest of time so that we can have a discussion. The first thing that is done in the classroom is functional behavioral assessment. What does that mean? It is not done in our classrooms in Macedonia. It's basically a sort of like an interview form, but it has many pages and it's filled out on a daily basis. And it's an analysis, it's a strategy of assessment so we can understand the function of the behavior of the autistic student. So that's the first step. Functional communication is the second step. So we all have the basic biological needs so that we can communicate our wants and needs. And this is why this level is as important as educators or parents, that we start also at this level with the other level that I just mentioned. Because we do not want our children to engage in a behavior because if they have no functional means to communicate what they want, right? So when we're in the classroom or when we're in the home, we have to alter our environment for success. So what does that mean? We know that children with autism thrive on routines, that they thrive on, they have behaviors, they get stuck with a certain pattern, with an activity they like, and they do not appreciate or like transitions. So giving transition warnings, and there are a couple of descriptions a little bit later, how this is done by adding visuals so that they can see always, because they're so visual and their visual acuity is so strong, they rely on this a whole lot. So we have to use this as a strategy, because when we use the visual, even if the child hears, you know, it comes in and it goes out, it leaves. If it's sign, they see it and it goes. But if it's visual and if it's there, it stays. And then the student continues to reinforce it again and again. So we always have to be mindful and always keep in mind that we incorporate the student's special interest. What is something that they like, right? So we start from there. Children on the spectrum have special interests. We know that. So sometimes, a lot of the times, they're obsessive special interest, and they actually will work well to keep the child engaged. So even though that they may be special interest, you can still use them to get very mainstream sort of like functional communication out of this by using this. So, oops, I don't know why, but for some reason, the back button, there we go, perfect. Okay, sorry about that. So the pre-activity intervention before you even start the education process. So why is this so important? These are the so-called pre-teaching materials or transition warnings or mini schedules and task organizers. So for a student with autism and a student who is deaf or hard of hearing, here, for example, there's a schedule. Wednesday, first, there is morning group. Then there is an early AM routine. Then we go to the factory, sensory arts, table time, we have music, Thursday, and so on. So they really know what to expect, right? And this is very useful. And we have to always look at the level of interest for the children and pay attention to this. And what is the role of positive reinforcement? When a child is learning a new strategy, when you're trying to teach them, always end with a positive note. Begin and end with a positive. And always, even though you're teaching them something that's hard for them, when you use the visual, okay, so for example, in this activity, the child loves coloring. The picture of coloring is right there. But then all these signs, hey, during class, you need to be quiet. Shh, your feet have to be calm. Your hands are down. You look at your teacher. You raise your hand and listen with your ears. And then, yay, you get to color. Good job. Peter, for example, right? So, what are the inclusive strategies that we use in the classroom? I will just brush through here. These are more general ones. We want most of the time, unless the student does not wish to do so, they have to be seated in front of the classroom. We minimize the background noise. We do not speak and face the board as teachers. We just have to be talking to them and facing them. We always make sure that we provide written materials to supplement all lectures. We repeat very clearly any questions, and then we also provide copies for our students. We always have a classmate, and this is good for peer relationship building and bonding. Even if a child has a special educator with them in the class, it's always good to include a learning buddy from the classroom that will take notes with them or play a game, because this is how they learn social communication as well. So we also want the students to be in an area where they do not have an obstructed line of vision, right? So, and the teachers, the educators can use assistive listening devices, and the students actually, such as induction loops, and then the hearing aids, maybe like the transmitters or receiver systems with a clip-on microphone, something that our professors used, right, at the university or some in high school. So this was also from the interview, and this is one of the last slides. The audiologist was asked by the interviewer, and this is a very important question. I, as a speech pathologist, think is like, what would you recommend for a family with a child who has hearing loss and ASD, has chosen a spoken language approach, yet has not seen adequate progress in listening and spoken language skills. And I get asked this question all the time, even though the children are not hard of hearing, they just have autism, and they just say, oh, you're going to introduce visuals and pictures. My child would refuse to speak. So here it is. Now the expert audiology answer. I would recommend adding pictures to aid in bridging that gap, and I would also add signs between where they are with their spoken language and their level of abstraction, of cognition. I have had parents that they say they want their children to talk, so they do not want to put in a different type of augmentative or alternative communication for their child. The research shows and the clinical practice shows that if a child is going to talk, having that AC device, right, augmentative or an alternative form of communication, in fact, just facilitates, it helps speech development. So also super important is that the other equally important piece is that we always make sure we're working with an audiologist, because this person is our lifetime buddy who will always screen and check the hearing of our child. This should be done on a regular, sometimes even monthly basis, just to make sure that the fine-tuning is happening, whether we're talking about a cochlear implant or we're talking about a hearing aid device. So with this, I would love to thank you all to listening to my sort of long presentation. I hope it was useful, and I would like to open the floor for discussion for any of your questions and any of your feedback on this or other topic. And then we have a few questions that we would like to discuss.